Coming up on tonight's Inside the Jungle, AC's back, so is Scott Bantel, and we're celebrating 5 years of Inside the Jungle with the play-by-play voice of the Cincinnati Bengals radio network, Dan Hoard. We'll also recap what happened on Friday night's game against the New York Giants and look ahead to Monday Night Football against the Bucs, plus your calls. That's all coming up. Let's hit it! This is Inside the Jungle, episode 208, recorded August 19th, 2015. Bengals win, 5 years of Inside the Jungle. Video bandwidth for Inside the Jungle is made possible by the support from our Patreon community. To help support Inside the Jungle today, log on to spnt.tv/Patreon. Hey, what's happening, Bengals fans? It's Inside the Jungle coming at you live here at cincyjungle.com, the Wednesday night roundtable. I'm joined by my tag team partners for tonight, Anthony Cosenza and Scott Bantel. We'll get to those guys here in just a minute. We're celebrating 5 years of Inside the Jungle on tonight's podcast, believe it or not. August 23rd is our anniversary date, but since we won't have another show before then, this is it. This is our 5-year celebration, and we're celebrating in style as we'll be joined by the play-by-play voice of the Cincinnati Bengals radio network, Dan Hoard, here in just a couple minutes. But before we do that, let's recap Friday night's game, shall we? I bring in my tag team partners, Anthony Cosenza and Scott Bantel. Anthony, welcome back, man. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm excited. I wish I had a little bit more of a heads up that this was going to be an anniversary shindig. I would have dressed up a little nicer than what I'm wearing right now.
Wow, but, that's who you are, man.
I guess.
Sun's out, guns out, man.
I guess. We miss missing Mickey, but it doesn't feel right doing an anniversary show without him. But good to chat with you guys once again, and excited to talk to Dan.
Mickey is currently sitting in a rain delay down at the Reds game against the Royals. So I think he'd much rather be here too, as well. But yeah, you look good tonight, AC. Don't you sweat it, man. We wouldn't have it any other way.
All right, thanks.
Scott, how about you, man? Did you have a good weekend?
I did, and happy anniversary, Nick. I did not know that. AC's going with the cutoff, slightly more clothed than you'll be in about 2 weeks, Nick.
I don't think so. I don't think so, boys. All right, so while we wait to hear from the man himself, Dan Hoard, why don't we recap what happened on Friday night and get our initial thoughts on the game. Give us just something brief, what your initial take was. I'll start with you, Anthony. Obviously, a 23-10 win over the New York Giants is pretty good. You want to get off to a good start in your preseason opener, but how much is this that the Bengals are that great, or is it the Giants aren't maybe so hot right now?
Yeah, it's probably a little bit of both. Overall, I was really impressed with the Bengals' performance, though. I feel like there's a lot of good players, multiple levels deep on the roster and on the positional depth chart, which is good to see. That game, it kind of bothered me a little bit, but again, it's the first game, so you got to take that into account. But what bothered me a little bit was just that game could have easily have been 38-10 Bengals. They left a lot of points out there, one by a missed field goal, a lot of terrible goal line and red zone drives after the first string offense went out, and they were pretty bad on third downs as well on offense after the first string went out. So that was a little disappointing, but overall, a lot of good to take away from that. Everybody seems relatively healthy as well, so that's a good sign, and I was pretty pleased with what I saw.
How about you, Scott? Obviously, the first team offense, they went down and scored a touchdown. We didn't really see much of them after the fact, but we did see Tyler Eifert get some action. We saw Marvin Jones get some playing time as well, which is a good sign for this Bengals offense.
Yeah, no doubt. I don't think you could ask for a preseason opener to go any better than it did. I mean, normally that first string might play a second series, but given how good they looked on the first possession, they got the rest of the night off. You got out of there without any injuries. The first string defense looked good. In fact, the second string defense looked good. So I'd say, as far as openers could go, you couldn't ask for better.
Were there any players that really stuck out to you that you're really kind of excited for moving on here through? I guess there's only a couple more days of training camp left. Now they'll just move into their regular routine.
Well, I mean, we had heard a lot about Will Clark and how he looked better this year, and Hardison as well, how he was looking. I thought both of those guys looked good on the defensive line. I thought that Deshaun Williams looked good as well. So, a couple of young guys on the defensive line that I think were pretty exciting to see. I think that cut down line on the defensive line is going to be quite intriguing.
One of the position groups that we've really been talking about at nauseum, it seems, over the summer, since we're not sure what the status is of Vontaze Burfict. But I thought Nico Johnson had a pretty good game there at middle linebacker for the Bengals. Here's a guy that has really struggled to see the field, and so the fact that he got some good reps in there, I thought he played rather well. What were your thoughts overall about the linebackers? And was there anybody else that stood out to you, AC?
It's a good call on Nico Johnson. He led the team in total tackles on the night, and he did fill in last year when a couple of guys went down injured. But you're right. Other than that, he hasn't really seen the field that much. But he looks to be just a solid backup player. So he might supplant some of the other guys at the back end of that depth chart. He did impress. Honestly, both sides of the ball, the first unit really impressed me. The offense was dead on. Even when a play didn't work out well, Dalton still scrambled for positive yardage. They just marched down the field. Really like that. I really like the running backs, and a lot of good physical play from defensive backs. Dre Kirkpatrick had a pass breakup. Josh Shaw had a couple of pass breakups. I liked what I saw out of the secondary, and that was the strong point of the team last year too. So, if this opener's any indication, it looks like it's going to be a strong point again this year.
Yeah, you compare and contrast the two teams, AC. Eli Manning played a couple series because he didn't get a lot of work in. Too many 3-and-outs. The other thing that I found concerning, again, it's week 1 of the preseason, so I mean you really can't put a whole lot into this. But the Bengals weren't very good on third down either.
Yeah, that's what I said in my opening statement there. They were decent. Like I said, it wasn't really an issue with those first stringers, but once Josh Johnson really took the majority of the snaps the rest of the game, they really struggled there. They really struggled in the red zone. They really struggled in goal to go situations. I think it was about 25% touchdown conversion rate there. So that's something you want to see improve, and that probably will improve once you see the starters and everyone else out there. But it is alarming, and there were times last year, too, that this offense struggled on third downs in the regular season, and that can't happen this year.
What about you, Scott? You got anything else you want to add? Is there anything that really had you really pumped and you're looking forward to seeing next Monday when they take on the Bucs?
Well, Tyler Eifert. I mean, we've heard about him all camp long. We saw him at the start of the year last year, but to see him out there healthy again, I mean, he was an immediate impact again. First play from scrimmage, you got a completion to him for like 12 yards. And, it pretty much goes to what we've been hearing in camp is people have had problems covering this guy. And, I think if he's healthy, this is a whole different offense. I think the way this offense will work, the way this offense can match up against defenses will be completely different with Eifert in the lineup.
How about your Azusa boy, AC? How did he end up doing Friday night? Were you excited to see him play?
Yeah, I mean, he was. I was hoping he'd get in a little earlier. They really held him off till like the last couple of series, and he looked good. He's quick on his feet for being 240 pounds, and you said Terrell Watson is out of Azusa Pacific. That's actually a rival of the college I went to, believe it or not, out here. So that's kind of a cool connection there. But big guy, quick feet, and he's good between the tackles, and I really liked what I saw out of him. And, when Cody Toomey and I went to that NFLPA Bowl back in January, he was the MVP of that game, and we didn't really know too much about him. And we came out of that weekend really impressed with him, and I was pretty excited when the Bengals ended up landing him. So it was good to see him out there. He had a high yards per carry average, which is good, and hopefully he gets more work going forward.
So Burkhead and Pearman were both injured, Scott, and I don't know how long of an injury. Maybe these aren't going to be significant injuries, but it did allow for guys like James Wilder Jr. and Terrell Watson to get some more additional reps, maybe more than they were expecting in that game. You're pretty excited about where this fourth string. I mean, this tells you where the Bengals are, right? We're excited about a fourth string roster battle between guys who probably won't play at all.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking about that before the show. You talk about like first world problems, then you got Bengals problems, and when you're talking about where's the exciting spots on this roster in the preseason, you look at fourth running back, maybe fifth or sixth wide receiver, fifth or sixth, defensive lineman. I mean, we're talking about the exciting battles on this team being the last few guys on the team. But, I find that stuff exciting. I think it's going to be an exciting battle for this fourth running back spot. Was glad to see Wilder and Watson get the additional time on Friday night. And, I was impressed with Watson. I'll be honest, this is the first time I've seen him in, live, but was impressed with how well he runs for a big guy. I know this is a very early comparison, but his style of running reminded me a bit of Sean Alexander. He looks a little bit awkward running, but he's very effective, just like I think Sean Alexander was. So, yeah, I liked what I saw out of him. If I was going to handicap it right now, that would be the guy I'd take.
Interesting. All right. Well, look, Bengals Friday night had a dominating win over the New York Giants. Again, it's the first preseason game, so you take it with a grain of salt. But it was good to see everybody play well. They came out injury-free, and, hey, now it's on to Tampa Bay. But before we do that, as I mentioned when we first started the show tonight, we're celebrating 5 years of Inside the Jungle, and what better way to do that than by bringing back one of our best guests. He's the play-by-play voice on the Bengals radio network. He's the best play-by-play man in the biz. It's the one and only Dan Hoare. Dan, thanks for joining us here.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on again.
So you've been, you're the good luck charm. You know this, right? 4 years in the broadcast booth, and you've made it to the postseason every single year. Does Mike Brown know that you're the good luck charm?
I remind him at every opportunity. So, yes, he definitely knows. Now, the fact that A.J. Green joined the team at the same time and Andy Dalton might have a little bit more to do with it than me, but if you want to give me the credit, I will gladly take it.
I'm going to give it to you all day, every day, Dan. So you've been down at training camp. You saw him play Friday night. What are your initial thoughts? What's been really sticking out to you so far here as we kick things off for the Bengals?
Well, I was very impressed Friday night. I think all Bengals fans were, but I'll take it a step further. It almost feels to me like the Bengals are already 2-0 in the preseason instead of 1-0 because of the way they dominated the final of the two head-to-head practices against the Giants and then dominated the game. It wasn't close, particularly up front, and it made me think after the game, I don't know how good the Giants are. If the Giants were in the AFC North, I think they would really struggle to win more than a game or two within the division because they just aren't stout enough to contend with Cincinnati, Baltimore, and Pittsburgh on a regular basis. They've got the quarterback, they've got great wide receivers, they've got a future Hall of Fame head coach, but their lines aren't very good, and I would be very surprised if the Giants had a great season.
Yeah, Dan, hey, this is Scott here. Thanks for joining us. We were just talking about it before on the show, and one of the things that we're interested in is this fourth running back position and how this plays out. You've been down there around the team. How do you handicap the fourth running back spot?
Well, I think that the top three are obvious. So you're talking about Cedric Pierman, James Wilder, Terrell Watson. Am I missing somebody, or are those the guys you're debating?
No, those are the three that we're debating.
Those are the guys you're debating. Yeah, I think because of his special teams contributions in the past and the fact that he's been a special teams captain, I would still make Cedric Pierman the favorite, but not a slam dunk cinch. I thought that James Wilder and Terrell Watson both played well in the game on Friday night. James Wilder is going to get a lot of opportunities on Monday, I'm sure, going home to Tampa. He told me earlier today that his dad, James Sr., the Tampa Bay Bucs all-time leading rusher, would be on Tampa Bay's side in a Cincinnati jersey. So that should be an interesting sight for Tampa Bay Bucs fans. But I guess if I had to handicap that final spot, I would go Pierman first, Wilder second, Watson third, and either Watson or Wilder is likely to be on the practice squad. I'm sure they will keep an extra running back on that practice squad.
So if that means you're thinking Burkhead's pretty much a lock at that number 3 spot, is that right?
I do. No doubt about it. 100% absolute lock. Not only based on his ability to run, but also the number of things that he's proven to be able to do from a receiving standpoint and lining up in the slot. I mean, really, he's probably lining up in the slot more frequently than he's lining up in the backfield right now, and he's a great weapon, as he showed in the playoff game at Indianapolis.
Dan, hey, it's Anthony Cosenza. I want to reiterate, great job with that training camp coverage. I enjoyed watching the live coverage between you and Dave Lapham. I wish they had stayed with you guys and not cut back to the NFL Network office, but great job there. Glad to have you on. I'm intrigued, especially with the tight end position. It seems like a lot of high potential, high ceiling guys, but very unproven. And obviously, there's high hopes for Tyler Eifert as a receiver. But how's the rest of the group kind of shaping up, and how are they looking through training camp so far?
I've been impressed with the 2 kids that were drafted this year, Uzama and Croft, and it's been interesting because back in OTAs, just watching them run around, not being in full pads, no tackling, I thought, boy, to me, Uzama looks like the 3rd-round pick, and Croft looks like the 5th-round pick. Uzama is big, he's strong, he's fast, he looks the part. And not that Croft isn't big and fast, but Uzama's a little bigger and a little faster. Then when you put on the pads and they're doing actual football stuff, you see where the experience makes a difference. Croft is more polished, he's less likely to make mental mistakes. It's nothing against Uzama. He really didn't play tight end at Auburn. They didn't have one. He didn't have a tight ends coach. So I think between the 2 of them, you're going to be fine in a number 2 and number 3 tight end situation. And I think moving forward, both of them have a legitimate chance to have very good NFL careers. And then, most importantly, Tyler Eifert is spectacular. This is the 3rd year in a row that, in my eyes, he has been the Bengals' best offensive player in training camp. He's like a training camp Hall of Famer. And if Tyler Eifert stays healthy, there's no doubt in my mind he will have a gigantic season.
Hey, Dan, I was hearing today that it looks like McCarron will play on Monday night.
Yes.
Going into camp, everyone seemed to think that McCarron was the surefire backup, and the Bengals have never kept 3 quarterbacks since they've changed the rules. With his health issues, can they afford to keep just him as their sole backup?
Well, that will depend on how he plays in the final 3 preseason games. If he plays really well, then I think, yes, I think they would roll the dice and hope that he didn't have to play, hope that Andy can extend his streak of playing in every game to 5 years in a row. But that's going to depend on how he plays in these final 3 preseason games. If he struggles, if he doesn't look like he's up for the task, then they either have to carry 3 or carry Josh Johnson and try to get AJ through to the practice squad. I think these final 3 preseason games are going to be critically important for him and the team in making that decision.
Dan, I'd like to get your overall impressions of the secondary group, namely Dre Kirkpatrick, who's stepping into a starting role for the first time really in his career, his NFL career, and what you saw out of Josh Shaw in the preseason opener. He was kind of roaming around everywhere and playing a bunch of different positions. So how's that group shaping up, and what do you think of those 2 guys so far?
I think the secondary is one of the strengths of the team, and I think it's one of the better units in the NFL. If you ask me who the Bengals' most impressive defensive player has been in this training camp, I would start with Geno Atkins. But after that, I would say Dre Kirkpatrick. I think he has been outstanding on a daily basis. I think Adam Jones has been really, really good. I think Leon Hall still has enough in the tank to be a 3rd corner and sometimes safety. And talking about Josh Shaw, there are days at practice that I'm like, I'm not sure he's going to be a good NFL corner. Maybe he has to be a safety. And then the next day, he looks great at corner. So I guess that's probably typical of a rookie just starting out, trying to figure things out in the NFL, particularly a guy that barely played last year in his final year at college. And as you mentioned, I thought he was terrific in the first game against the Giants. So I think that also bodes well moving forward.
So we've been hearing a lot, Dan, about Leon Hall and whether or not he's going to be playing corner this year. There's talk about moving him to safety. What's going on with him, and how's he looking?
I think he looks pretty good. He's played a lot of safety during camp. He's gone back and forth between corner and safety, and I think that's probably what they're going to have him do during the course of the season. I think depending on how many corners they have on the field, he can easily slide backward and do both. So, right now, Darqueze Dennard is a little bit banged up. That makes Leon definitely the third corner behind Dre and Adam Jones. And when Darqueze is healthy, maybe he ultimately is the guy that gets the most snaps as the third corner. But I think during the course of this season, Bengals fans will be happy that Leon Hall is still around. You've got to have guys that have been there before, and he's not the player he was maybe 3 or 4 years ago, but I think he's certainly good enough.
Hey, Dan, I had one other question on the defensive side of the ball. We were talking beforehand how impressed we were with some of the young defensive linemen, particularly Hardison and Will Clark and Deshaun Williams on Friday night. The one guy that, I'd heard was looking good as far as the shape he was in coming into camp was Devin Still. And, unfortunately, I didn't think Still looked very good on the field on Friday night. How do you see the final spot or two on that defensive line playing out? Do you think Still makes the cut, or do we get a guy like a Deshaun Williams on the team?
Well, don't forget about Pat Sims. I think Pat Sims was outstanding in the game on Friday night against the Giants. He's had a great camp. He had the lead practice today. It looked like he might have tweaked his groin a little bit, had an ice pack on it, and maybe missed the last 45 minutes or so of practice. But he stayed out there, so I don't think it's anything serious, probably just precautionary. But based on what I've seen at camp and what we saw in the first preseason game, I would certainly put Pat above Devin Still. It doesn't mean that Devin's not going to make the team or can't make the team, but again, if you're asking me to evaluate that right now based on what I've seen, I think Big Pat gets the nod over Devin.
Dan, there you talked about Rex Burkhead earlier, and there's a couple guys on this roster who are kind of these flex position guys. We mentioned Shaw also, who's kind of a safety corner hybrid. There's Hewitt, who's kind of the H-back, emergency tight end type of guy, and then Burkhead, who's getting more looks at wide receiver. Do you think they hang on to those guys and it allows a little bit more flexibility at other crowded position groups when the final roster cuts come?
Yeah, I think with some guys it definitely does. I mean, in Hewitt's case, he's really the fullback on the roster. Yeah, he's an H-back, and he can line up at the tight end a little bit, but if you're looking at how the roster is made up, that's the guy that's penciled in really as your fullback. In Burkhead's case, his ability to play wide receiver certainly gives them some more flexibility in determining who the other guys are going to be at the wide receiver position. Maybe that helps you keep younger guys like an Alford. I think Alford's probably close to a lock to being one of the wide receivers, but he doesn't have much experience. He's still learning that position. He wasn't asked to do much in West Virginia. So the fact that Rex can also help out and be versatile in that spot certainly helps the Bengals grow some of these younger guys into more productive roles.
So one of the names and one of the bigger lightning rods in and around Bengaldom is Brandon Tate, Dan, and we also hear all this talk over the offseason about this Mario Alford kid returning kicks and being this special teams whiz. Is this the year we're going to see maybe some changes in the return game and they're going to stick it out with Alford even though he does lack that experience?
Well, I think Alford is going to make the team. I don't think there's any doubt about that. After the top three receivers, A.J. Sanu and Marvin Jones, the other three spots, assuming they keep six, are a little bit up in the air. I would say that after the top three, Alford is probably the closest thing you have to a lock. I think he's shown enough, both as a receiver and a return man, to really excite the coaching staff about his potential. So I think there's a really highly likely chance that he's going to still be on the team at the start of the season. Then after that, we'll see. I think Tate still has value as a reliable return man. We know that Adam Jones is not going to be returning punts all of the time because of the amount of time that he's playing defense. And I like you say, I know that Brandon is a lightning rod, but to the coaching staff and Darren Simmons in particular, at least he's someone he trusts. He's not going to go out there under the lights, choke, fumble a punt in a key situation. If nothing else, he'll catch the ball and advance it. So I can't say for sure that he's made the team. It's probably way too soon to say that, but I can definitely say that he's not out of the running yet.
Well, I've been saying for weeks Brandon Tate is a lock, and I'm sticking to my word there, Dan Horde.
Well, we'll see. You might be right. Certainly James Wright's injury helped Brandon Tate, because James Wright was ahead of him on the depth chart, and since he's going to be out for the entire season, Brandon moved up a notch.
Dan, speaking about the wide receivers, we had Jeff Hobson on a few weeks ago, and he surprised us when he had brought up the idea that he wouldn't be surprised if the Bengals brought in another free agent wide receiver at some point in time. Is that something you could see them doing, or do you see enough out of the guys that they have that they just stick with what they got?
Well, I suppose it depends who's out there after the final cuts. They will certainly look at the available talent and try to determine if one of those guys is better than the last guy that they would be keeping. If that's the case, they won't hesitate to make that change. But some of the guys that they have are doing good things. Greg Little had an excellent first game. I think he's had a very good camp. I think he paid attention to the things that Marvin Lewis said when they brought him back and basically challenged him to be productive every day, just not from time to time. So Greg Little, if he continues to have a good preseason, they might not have to comb the waiver wire for another guy.
Yeah, and sticking on the offensive side there, with the offensive line, Smith didn't play on Friday night. I guess, one, is he going to play? Any idea if he'll play on Monday night? And two, how concerned
I would expect him to play on Monday. I would expect Andre to play on Monday.
Okay, how concerned should we be about Bodine's snapping in camp?
Well, I'm concerned about it. It's strange because he had the same problem last year during the preseason, and then it didn't seem to carry over to the regular year, thank heavens. So I guess we're all hoping that the exact same thing happens this time around. But certainly when you see a couple of bad snaps almost every day during training camp, you can't help but be concerned. The problem is he is far and away the best center you have on this roster. So it's not like you're going to say, all right, had a couple of bad snaps again today, you're out, pick a guy, TJ Johnson is in. Russell Bodine is their center, period. So he's got to get it fixed in time for week 1 in Oakland, because there really isn't an alternative that's nearly as good as he is.
Well, I know Marvin said he's not going to give Daily Vontaze updates. So how badly have you wanted to ask him about his status, and how's he looking? I mean, I know he hasn't been doing a lot of practicing, but I mean, he is our leader on the defensive side of the ball. It would be really nice to have him back this year.
Yeah, he hasn't been doing any practicing. He has occasionally done rehab stuff where we've been able to see it. The last time I saw him do any actual rehab was the family day practice at Paul Brown Stadium, and he was out there for quite a while, and I thought he looked pretty good, to tell you the truth. They had cones out there, so he was doing running and cutting, stopping and starting type drills, which, are hard to do if your knee is not in at least decent shape. And I thought he looked good, but that's much different from getting out there and playing football. The hope from the very beginning was that he would be able to play at least a little bit in the final 2 preseason games. If he could do that, then he would be ready for week 1 in Oakland. So we're going to have a much better idea next week after the Tampa Bay game if it's realistic to expect him to be on the field or not. If he doesn't practice in the days leading up to the 3rd preseason game, then I would say it's probably unlikely that he'll be good to go in week 1.
Well, let's hope they don't rush him back. I think that the way that they've drafted and some of the guys they've signed in the offseason, guys like A.J. Hawk, and they also drafted a guy in P.J. Dawson from TCU. We just got this question in our chat room. This is from Tony Rinaldi. He wants to know your thoughts on linebacker. He noticed that P.J. Dawson didn't get in till later, but how's he looking so far in camp?
He kind of looks like what you heard he was going to look like when they drafted him. I don't think he is a practice Hall of Famer, but he's got good instincts, and I think that he shows up better in the games. I think that was the scouting report on him at TCU, and then he went out and led the Big 12 in tackles and had 4 interceptions and forced fumbles, etc. So I think that's what they're hoping out of him, and I think we see a little bit of that when he plays. He didn't get a ton of snaps against the Giants, but when he was out there, I thought he was productive. So I imagine we're going to see more of him on Monday night in Tampa than we did last Friday against the Giants.
And I thought Nico Johnson played well at linebacker, led the team in tackles, and a name that we haven't heard a whole bunch, but I thought when called upon, he played really well the other night.
I agree, and he was out there most of the time being the person in communication with Paul Gunther. He was wearing the helmet radio and then making the calls defensively. So that's a guy that not many people have penciled in as a real candidate to make the final 53, but maybe we gave up on Nico Johnson too soon.
Dan, this may be a silly question, but we did see some good things out of the undrafted rookie Tom Obarski, the kicker. He nailed a deep one. He did miss a chip shot, but came back and kicked another couple of field goals. I actually graduated from a Concordia myself, so I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about him. Is there any chance at all that he either supplants Nugent or they maybe keep him on the practice squad and develop him down the road? How has he looked in camp and all of that good stuff?
I don't think that there's any chance that he supplants Mike Nugent this year, assuming that Mike is healthy. And I think the hamstring issue that caused him to miss the first preseason game is nothing serious. I would be surprised if they kept him on the practice squad. They typically don't have a kicker, although sometimes they do. But even if he's not on the practice squad, that doesn't mean that he's not a candidate to be their kicker moving forward. That's often how it works in the NFL. A guy gets his chance, puts some tape on, for all 32 NFL teams, and doesn't necessarily make a team right off the bat, but keeps practicing, keeps getting stronger, winds up in somebody else's camp, and eventually gets his chance to kick in the NFL. So I think Tom has been fairly impressive. He had the one low line drive kick that was returned 70 yards the other night, but he definitely has a good leg. He made a 59-yarder at your old school in his college days. So he's got a chance. I just don't think it's going to be here right off the bat.
Well, and you never know, too, Dan, because although we've gotten pretty lucky when it comes to Mike Nugent, he also hasn't stayed healthy throughout his entire career as well. So that's another one of those spots where you just never know.
Yeah, that's correct. In Mike's 6 years with the Bengals, there have been 2 seasons where he didn't make it to the end of the year. So it not only happens here, but it happens elsewhere. And if Obarski puts a lot of good kicks on tape, certainly all 32 teams will be looking.
Dan, when we take a look at this roster, I think back in the years past, and when the Bengals were the team kind of scouring on cut day, looking to pick up other people's players, and how this roster's been built, it's the reverse now. There's guys that are going to be cut on this team that are going to be immediately picked up. It goes so far as your first-round draft pick this year in Cedric Ogbuehi. He's recovering, but we really don't even talk about him because they're so deep at offensive line. Is he going to – I imagine he starts the season at least on the PUP list, but do you think they'll play him at all this year, or might they almost redshirt him?
I think they will redshirt him if they can. So that's assuming that Witt and Andre stay healthy. That assumes that Eric Winston stays healthy and can do the job if needed. Fisher gets healthy again. Right now he's having a little shoulder issue, and he can contribute. I mean, I think the goal is let's get Cedric 100% healthy. Let's get him practicing with an NFL team, and let's hope that he's not needed in year one. But you get him ready just in case. Last year, as we saw, you can sometimes have entire position groups wiped out by injury. Let's hope it doesn't happen at the tackle position or the offensive line in general. But when he's able to practice, they'll get him working and have him ready just in case.
Well, Dan, we certainly appreciate you stopping by the podcast. For our 200th episode, you had some very kind words for our show, and I thank you for that. And and I thank you again as well for celebrating 5 years of our podcast. We couldn't have had a better guest on for our celebration tonight. So thank you for joining us, and best of luck. I know I'm looking forward to you bringing home a 5th straight playoff appearance this year.
You're looking forward to me bringing home the first playoff win since Phil Samp was the voice of the Bengals. That's what you're really looking forward to.
That's right.
That's what I'm looking forward to. So let's hope we can do one of these again, talking about the second playoff game in January. How does that sound?
And more, hopefully, right?
Yeah, exactly. Let's hope you're doing nightly shows in the 2 weeks leading up to Super Bowl 50, and you can have me on as one of the guests. How did that sound?
That's perfect. We're going to hold you to it, Dan. Appreciate you stopping by.
Fair
and
enough.
Best of luck this year. We know you're going to crush it on the air, and you do a great job as always.
Well, thank you. Keep up the good work. You guys are great fans and great at what you do, and I enjoy the site. So thanks for having me on.
Thanks,
There
Dan.
he is, Dan Horde, ladies and gentlemen, joining us. Appreciate him stopping by the program. The guy is a legend. I love listening to him call games. He's very gracious with this time. Glad he could join us here as we celebrate 5 years of Inside the Jungle. Pretty cool stuff, right, guys?
Absolutely, and you know what's kind of cool about Dan and Jeff is they seem like genuinely nice, awesome guys. Like we talked about when we had Hobson on about how rad would it be to just sit around with Jeff and talk Bengals for 3 hours and have a couple of beers. Well, bring Dan into that round table and do the same thing. I mean, they just seem like awesome guys. They're very complimentary to us, and that's very flattering. So really like both those guys a lot.
Yeah, and I said it before. I got to meet both of them in person down at the Taste of Cincinnati this year when getting those clips. And you're right, AC. I mean, the two guys, they couldn't be nicer. Such nice guys. They're great at what they do. And, for them to come on the show, we really appreciate it. And, it's great just talking football with them. I tell you what, a round table with Jeff and Dan and a couple beers would be a heck of a lot of fun.
It would be a lot of fun. And, yeah, I mean, not just them, but how about fans of the show, right? The show is growing so large. I can imagine that's pretty much what this show is on a nightly basis on Wednesday nights. It's us just sitting around talking about the Bengals with people around the world. I just think that's amazing. The fact that we've grown to where we are in 5 years is just I'm almost speechless. That's pretty crazy. All right, so we got some emails this week, and I think it'd be good if we take a look at some of these. The first email, this kind of ties in to recapping Friday night's game. This email comes from Richard Rolson, good fan of the show. He sent a little bit of a long one, so just bear with me. He is commenting on Friday night's game. He says, players that played themselves onto the bubble, I think there are two ways a player plays himself onto the bubble. There is the player who is expected to make the team, but because of rough play, injury, or the play of others is now on the bubble to make the team. And then there are those players who are not given much of a chance and suddenly looks like he could be a contributor. So for him, one of the players he thinks is in a little bit of trouble is Devin Still. He says he loves his story, really wants him to do well, but he is just not the same caliber as the rest of the line. Jason DeMonch wasn't noticeable during the game, and Chris Carter is making the coaches notice. Sean Williams got hurt again, and Leon Hall has been taking some snaps at safety. Plus, Deron Smith is making the coaches notice as well. He's got a lump in Brandon Tate because he dropped the pass over the middle. And let's see. Yeah, those are the players that he thinks are in trouble. Would you agree with that statement?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about it with Devin Still. I mean, everyone knows his story. You couldn't root for a better guy. You heard about how good of shape he was coming into camp. You saw him, physically he looks great. I was expecting big things. I was expecting to see the guy that won the 2011 Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year award. And on Friday night, he just looked overmatched. I mean, he was getting pushed around, and, he wasn't in there against the first team. So, he was getting pushed around by backups. And unfortunately, I think he looked like the weakest link on the defensive line when you take a look at the way Hardison and Deshaun Williams played.
Right, I agree that it's pretty spot on with some of that analysis there that was sent to us. The one player that I will disagree with, and I know he's been awesome in practice, and I actually think he's going to be a good NFL player, but he didn't really impress me in the game, was Darren Smith. He had 2 tackles, and his only 2 tackles were after he kind of let up 2 completions. So, that falls on a couple of different people. The corner, covering the receiver as well, but he was behind on pass coverage and did allow 2 completions, and those were his only 2 tackles. So that's a little bit of one where I go, well, good in practice, not so great in the game. Sean Williams, though, got hurt, and then he got trucked by a running back, also let up a big completion. Devin Still, as Scott mentioned, he looked like he was on skates at certain times, just being pushed back, and that's a shame because, again, like Scott mentioned, he looked to have really improved his physique this offseason and shed some weight, gained some muscle, and doesn't really seem to be doing much for him, unfortunately. So, yeah, like I said, pretty spot on with some of that analysis there.
All right, so Richard also, he says, now here are the players who are going to make the coaches really have to think. He says, Troy Hill, I think he could make the team over Sean Williams. Mario Alford, want to see more on the return, but his speed is unmatched on the team. Deshaun Williams, the end of the Devin Still era with the Bengals. James Wilder Jr. could make the team over C.J. Uzuma, with Ryan Hewitt taking more tight end snaps. And he says, honorable mentions Terrell Watson, Tom Obarski, and Dan France. What are your thoughts on that, guys?
Well, go ahead, Scott. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say I disagree with him on the Wilder over Azuma part. I don't see that happening. I think Azuma, however you say his name, 100% makes the team. I think Wilder's got an uphill battle. I agree with him on Alford. I think he makes the team. What were some of his other ones? Deshaun Williams. I think Williams is one where he's either the last defensive lineman on the team, or he's tagged for the practice squad. I don't know that he'll get there because he'd have to clear waivers, but he's played well certainly.
Yeah, Williams was another guy that was at the NFLPA Bowl that kind of opened Cody's eyes and my eyes that weekend. He played pretty well. He's kind of the speed rush guy at defensive tackle. He's a little smaller, but really liked what I saw out of him. But there's still, as Dan said, there's still 3 preseason games to play here, and a lot of these guys are going to get more time that will either benefit them or hurt them. So, there's still a lot to play out with all of these guys. I think Uzuma makes the team. I think he's too athletic for them to give up on. He did have a couple of nice catches, but then he had a terrible play towards the end of the game where he wasn't really expecting a ball. Keith Wenning, I believe it was, threw the ball right at his chest. He wasn't looking for it. It bounced off it, and then they went for it on 4th down, and then Wenning threw an interception that almost went for a touchdown. So, he's still raw, but I think they're going to hang on to him because of his upside. A lot of those other guys, we'll see. I think there tends to be a knee-jerk reaction type of thing after one preseason game, and it always happens. There's a guy that impresses early on, then all of a sudden fades down the stretch, and vice versa. So we'll kind of have to see.
Thanks for the email, Richard. Solid as always. Next email, this comes from Kevin Daubert in Reading, Pennsylvania. He says, hey, guys, it's your resident Bengals fan from Reading, PA. Just a few quick questions for you. Do you guys get as nervous as I do whenever Tyler Eifert gets tackled? And have you ever seen a position group with more rookies than this year's tight ends? Coach Hayes is definitely earning his money this year. Love the show. Hey, thanks for the email, Kevin. Yeah, he's got a point. We are pretty young at tight end, and I do get nervous, especially seeing that massive brace he's got on his elbow now with Tyler Eifert. AC, your thoughts?
Yeah, Eifert looking like RoboCop out there a little bit, right, with the big old brace. You get nervous, but at some point it's football. The guy's played it his entire life. I think he just had a couple of freak tackles that got him injured, and at some point he's got to get out there and just roll with it. It does make you nervous, especially in the preseason. You don't want something to happen then, but I think maybe I'm just being optimistic. I think a lot of that stuff is behind him. As for Jonathan Hayes, the tight ends coach, you try and give him kudos, but there's a lot of different players at the tight end position who have underachieved or disappointed under his watch. Chase Kaufman being one, Jermaine Gresham, however you want to view him, kind of being another. And now he's got these 2 young rookies that he's got to coach up. So one of them in Uzuma being pretty raw. So you got to hope that he really shows his worth as a coach and as a position coach with this team, so these guys can come in and contribute right away, because it's as we talked with Dan Horde, it's a high potential group, but it's very improving, and that's a little scary.
You have any thoughts on that, Scott, or did you miss your mute button? It wouldn't be an episode of Inside the Jungle without that.
No, I did not miss my mute button.
Right.
I was speechless.
All right.
I think Anthony hit it.
Awesome. Thanks for the email, Kevin. And last but not least, this email is from Steve in Indiana. He says, if you can pick any two players to extend before the season, who would it be? I'd vote AJ and Iloka personally. Huge fan. Keep up the good work. Thanks for the email, Steve. So, Scott, if there were two players you had to pick for a contract extension before the season, who would it be?
First, I'd go George Iloka. I think they need to wrap him up. I was impressed with his play last year. I'm not so sure they re-signed Nelson, so I think they need to keep Iloka. Second would be did they pick up the option on Kirkpatrick? Is that what
Yes.
they? Okay.
Yes, him and Zeitler, yeah.
But I would say the second guy would be Kirkpatrick. I would try to lock him up long term, and I think you probably lock him up a little bit cheaper now than you could at the end of the season because I think he's going to have a big season.
It's hard to disagree with Green and Aloka, and I know a lot of people are adverse to paying a wide receiver, but he's been such a key to this team's success. So I think you pay him, and I like Aloka and what he did, and he proved in his first year as a starter that he's worth a good investment, and I hope they do that. And that's kind of the argument I would have against extending Drake Kirkpatrick at this point. He's had some big plays. He's had some mishaps and injuries as well. Let's see how he does as a starter and maybe pay a little more. At least you know what you're getting when you extend a guy like that instead of, maybe getting a reasonable deal, still paying a good amount of money and seeing how it plays out. But it's hard to go against Green and Aloka. I would like to see them also extend Zeitler at some point. He is, as I just mentioned, under that fifth-year option, but it's getting hard for them to extend all these guys on the offensive line. Maybe that's the plan with these two rookie tackles and the cheaper contracts, but Bowling's making a lot of money all of a sudden. Whitworth's making a good amount of money. So is Smith, and they're going to need to figure out some stuff. Hopefully Zeitler sticks around because he's a good player.
Nick, it's a shame Mickey's not here tonight. He could say how they should lock Dalton up for another long-term extension with some more guaranteed money. that would fire up the masses in the jungle, wouldn't it?
It absolutely would. That is pretty funny. But I wouldn't be surprised if they did it. I wouldn't be surprised one bit if they did it. I'm gonna go with Steve. I'm going with George Aloka and AJ Green. I mean, that's obviously the safe bet, but I'm going to go with those two players. So good email. Thanks for emailing, guys. Really appreciate it. If you want to email the show and have us read it here on the program, you can always email us insidethejungle@spnt.tv. So I know all of you have been chomping at the bit to call in. We'll open up those phone lines. 404-946-3397 is the number to call. Have your voice heard. Talk about the Bengals. Let us know your thoughts on what happened Friday night against the Giants. Of course, it wouldn't be Inside the Jungle without the one and only Fatal content as we celebrate our 5th anniversary of the podcast here tonight. Fatal, welcome to the program, buddy.
Gentlemen, how you doing, man? Happy 5th year anniversary, and I will say I've been lucky the last few weeks being the first caller. My timing is pretty good.
Your timing is very good. We appreciate you calling in. Give us your take on what happened Friday night.
Oh man, I think I was very impressed with the first team offense, of course, and they look sharp, they look crisp. I will say, I keep kind of a little bit of perspective because the Giants were a little weak on defense last year, and I will say that their offensive line was a bit of a struggle. So, the way our D-line manhandled them was pretty impressive. But I want to temper it down a little, maybe see if they can bring it into next week. If they do, then I'll definitely be as impressed as I was this first game.
So the Bengals start their preseason off with not the greatest opponents in the world. I mean, the Giants weren't very good a year ago. They weren't good Friday night. Now they're going to go play against the Tampa Bay Bucks. A team they struggled with. I believe that was last year, right? With the challenge flag. I think that was last year when they struggled with the Bucks. So, but again, they're starting a rookie quarterback, and all kinds of changes there for the Bucks. Fatal. So, give us a question of the night.
Oh, I guess I'll start it off again with a comment. I will say that, man, our wide receiving core is going to be a a tough cut down at the when we get to the final 53. I think that Denarius Moore, AJ Green, of course, Mohamed Sanu, Marvin Jones looked crisp, and with the kid Alfred, I think that man, we have a possibility to be very explosive. I was wondering where you guys thought they could rank in the NFL rankings if they all stay healthy and Dalton improves.
You're talking total offense?
No, I'm talking the wide receiving core. If they can be one of the best units in the NFL.
Oh, okay.
If you guys think they can.
All right. Well, I mean, if Marvin Jones stays healthy, we know what we get out of him, right? We saw it 2 years ago. If he can duplicate that season, this offense is going to be hard to beat. But as far as the top receiving cores go, I'm still going to say, for now, I know you have A.J. Green up there, and he's obviously one of the best receivers in the league, but if Jones doesn't stay healthy, we haven't seen Sanu do enough. Like we see stretches of Sanu where, man, he's awesome, and then he goes away. So I'm going to say right now, I'll say maybe top 12, right around 12th. But it could be higher. It definitely could be higher. What about you guys? AC, start us off.
Oh, I think it could be higher than that, definitely. And I think right now, if I'm going real early and basing some of the things I heard off of Dan Horde, I think you go Green, Sanu, Jones, Alford, Denarius Moore, and then pick someone for the sixth spot. Maybe. But I think if it's all about health with this group, and because there's times where Sanu has not been healthy. His rookie year, he started to really click and catch a few touchdowns. He got hurt. Marvin Jones has battled injury, and then all of a sudden AJ Green, who's been indestructible, battled some injuries last year. So, if these guys can stay healthy and really be there together and play into Hugh Jackson's system the way he envisions it with all the pieces there, I think they could be a dominant group.
I think for the purpose of the question, we have to assume health, and I think if you do, I think you'd be tough to find another team that goes three deep as deep as the Bengals do. You're talking about Sanu, a guy that had 8 or so hundred yards last year. Jones the year before had 10 touchdowns, I think it was, about 700 yards, 10 touchdowns. I'd put their top three up against pretty much any team in the NFL. So if they're all healthy, I think they're a top 5 group, I'd say, in the NFL when you're going 3 or 4 deep.
But it is hard to assume health with this group.
Sure.
There's no question about that. So that's our take. Fatal content.
Yeah, you guys definitely. I'm on the same boat as the last two guys just said. I mean, I'm gonna say that I do think, barring any injury or none of that happening, I do think that they're a very explosive unit. I think that they're possibly one of the most explosive in the NFL. I don't think they're being talked about enough. But if Marvin Jones could become the solid number 2, I think that Sanu, I mean, he's as good as any number 3 in the NFL. Like you said, he fizzles out, but I think it's more so because we tried to make him take on the number 1 type role due to injury. I think if he stays in his position, I think we're one of the deepest. And you can even throw in a guy like Greg Little if he can somehow reemerge and become, what people thought he could, at least a semblance of that. I think we're going to be explosive, man.
Yeah, I thought Greg Little had a pretty good game Friday night. Had a good catch along the sidelines. Yeah, I mean, if he can get back to the form where that a lot of folks thought he could be, then you never know. I mean, he could end up being an impact player for this team, but at the same time, I just worry about the health of Marvin Jones and Mohamed Sanu. So we'll see. It's going to be a fun year, and the fact that everybody's going to be back healthy to start the year, knock on wood, is going to be a good thing as well. So appreciate the call, Fatal. Got to run.
No problem, man. You guys take it easy, man. Good 5 years with you guys. Hopefully to have another 50. So
50?
You guys take it easy, man.
Appreciate the call, Fatal. Hooday. Fatal kicking things off here on Inside the Jungle. Let's go to area code 443. Hi, who's this?
It's Keenan from Maryland. How y'all doing tonight?
Hey, Keenan, how's it going, man?
It's going good, man. I've been loafing on your show, man. I decided to call up, man. It's first preseason game, but my question is, serious question, guys. What are we going to do with Peko? I hope he's not starting. I was past him starting because I heard someone on Bleacher Report about it.
Well, your first mistake was reading Bleacher Report. No, I kid. I'm totally kidding. I think Peko's going to be. He's Marvin's guy, right? I mean, he's been the solid foundation at defensive tackle. Honestly, Keenan, I think you're going to see a better year from Peko because you got a healthier Geno Atkins. I think that was huge a year ago. Teams knew they didn't have to double team Geno, and what happened? Peko paid the price, literally.
Yeah, I hope you're right. I don't believe it.
Well, I mean, the good news is too they're deep, right? They've got Pat Sims. Brandon Thompson can play as well. This guy Marcus Hardison. There's a lot of praise for what he's done so far in camp, and I thought he played well Friday night too. So, they're deep there. And if anything, it's good to have another rotation guy. Hopefully he's not taking every snap at defensive tackle, but I think having a healthy Geno Atkins next to him this year will benefit everybody, not just Peko. All right, Keenan?
Yep. I guess.
All right. Well, hey,
have a good night, though.
Appreciate the call, man. Don't be a stranger. That's Keenan giving us a ring from Maryland here on Inside the Jungle. If you want to give us a call, 404-946-3397 is the number to dial us up. And also, if you're outside of the country and you want to ring in, you can hit us up. Our Skype account is Inside the Jungle. So, the Bengals play, I believe, on Monday night, if I'm correct, against the Tampa Bay Bucks at a nationally televised game, so I'll actually get to watch it. Yay! Still a little miffed that I'm a Sunday ticket subscriber through DirecTV and can't watch the preseason games. What a joke. But that's neither here nor there, and that's a debate for another podcast. So they're playing the Bucks on Monday night. Give me a score prediction, and what are you most looking forward to when they play the Bucks, Scott?
I'll say 28-13. Most looking forward to. I'd like to see A.J. McCarron throw a pass in the NFL.
Yes.
If like we talked about with Dan Horde, if they're going to go with just one backup quarterback like they have in the past, and that guy is A.J. McCarron, we got to start seeing this guy healthy. We got to start seeing, if Andy Dalton would go down, can he keep the boat afloat type thing. So, I'd like to see him actually throw some passes and see what we got here.
You got a score prediction for us, Scott?
28-13.
All right, he's saying 28-13. By the way, I predicted last week 17-10. I was not that far off. Darn that Tom Obarski. He had to kick 2 field goals.
I guess there are a few things I'm looking forward to. I mean, one, the Bengals are going to be on quote unquote Monday Night Football, so that's always kind of exciting. I think what I'm most looking forward to is to see these guys who impressed us in week 1 of the preseason: Deshaun Williams, Marcus Hardison, Josh Shaw. Some of those guys, if they can keep the momentum and still continue to be consistent in their play and consistently make us happy in the progress that we're seeing from week to week. So, and I definitely agree with Scott too. I mean, I'm anxious to see McCarron. It's been a long time coming. So hopefully he can get out there and play. That would be nice to see. So those are some of the things I'm looking forward to. In terms of a score prediction, like I said, it's prime time and it's Bengals in prime time. You never know what's going to come there. So I guess I'll say 24-20 Bengals.
All right. I'm going 17-10 again, going with a low-scoring affair based on what I saw on third down the other night from the Bengals backups. So going low-scoring affair. But what I am interested in seeing, I want to see Nico Johnson. Can he back up his play from week 1 and maybe fight for one of those backup linebacker spots this fall? I thought he played really well the other night. Anxious to see how he's going to do in week 2 of the preseason. I'd also like to see a little more from Greg Little. I'm surprised I'm saying that, but I thought he played rather well against the Giants the other night. Brandon Tate, my man, I know I'm expecting big things from him on Monday night as well. So those are the things I'm looking forward to, and I'm sticking with a 17-10 win for the Bengals. Let's go back to the jungle line. Area code 513. Hi, who's this?
Hey, Greg from Cincinnati. How y'all doing?
Hey, Greg, what's happening, man?
Nothing much. Just enjoyed the game Friday. I didn't really see too much, but we're just really disappointed me. You look at Josh Johnson playing all those quarters. That should have been A.J. McCarron. And, if I was Josh Johnson, I got to say to myself, okay, this is my chance. I get a lot of playing time. I got to make something big here. He made some nice throws and all that, but he did absolutely really nothing to impress me. But, of course, a couple of preseasons ago, everybody was like, oh, this guy should be the starter and all that after how good he did in the preseason. But, man, he didn't do anything to impress me. But out of all the guys, though, one guy that stood out for me also was Greg Little. And you know how I felt about getting Greg Little back, but I think he's thinking to himself, this is my only shot right here. So, the guy so the player of the game, in my opinion, was Greg Little, but the guy who I just didn't impress me at all was Josh Johnson.
I thought Johnson, when watching the tape, it looked like he was a lot more quick to run than he needed to be. He also stood in there and took some shots and threw the ball downfield as well. So you got to give him credit there. But there were times where he there was, I believe, on a screen play, instead of throwing the screen pass, he decided to opt to run for it, which I think if he would have thrown the ball, they would have gained some more yards than him running with it. There were a couple times where I thought he just missed his reads. There were some open players that he just missed. And you got to also remember that it's been a while for Josh Johnson. He hasn't played in an NFL game in quite some time as well. So maybe the rust was there for him too.
Yeah, probably so. Yeah, you're right. But, now if you wanted to tell the play of the game, it's when that running back for the Giants was running up the middle, and like you were talking about, they were talking about Pat Sims. Pat Sims literally bull rushed him to the ground. It was like a guy running into a tree or something.
Well, I know, AC, you're pumped about Pat Sims. I'm disappointed that he got hurt today. Hopefully it's not something that lingers too much. But, Pat Sims, when they brought him back, I know you were excited about that, AC.
Yeah, they brought him back on the cheap, which is also pretty good. And, there are just players that fit a system well, and when they leave, that's kind of the pitfall of free agency. Guys who have been pretty productive players, they go and they either get an increased role elsewhere or they're in a different system that doesn't really suit what they do well, and then they fizzle out and become a quote-unquote free agent bust. But, we joke about the reunion tour the Bengals did with free agency this year, bringing back all these familiar faces, but that's a guy who was very productive in their defense. And there was another call, I think it was Keenan, talking about D'Amata Pico. Having Sims there, Pico may be the starter on the paper, but I think his snaps are going to decrease significantly. And especially if Sims makes the team, he'll be the starter by name, but he won't play as many snaps as he did last year, both because Sims is there and just more depth they've built on that line.
So there you have it. Hey, Greg, appreciate the call. It wouldn't be the 5th anniversary of Inside the Jungle without you, man. Appreciate all the calls and all the support.
I will do, buddy. I appreciate it. Hooday.
Hooday. That's Greg from Cincy here on Inside the Jungle. All right, boys, let's do some shout-outs, shall we?
Shout-outs!
All right, AC, start us off this week.
Oh, boy. Okay. I'm going to shout out, let's see. I'm going to shout out Jeff Fisher, who gave a beer suggestion to me via Twitter, and it was a Red Hook IPA. I haven't tried it yet, though. And another gentleman I have not heard from before, but he commented on a post that I had today on the 4th running back, the fan poll on Cincy Jungle, Joseph Groh, and he's at JAG45209.
All right, good shout-outs. You got a beer of the week?
Yeah. I'll do Ballast Point Grunion Pale Ale. That's the most recent buy. So that's the beer of the week.
Good stuff. How about you, Scott? You got a shout out?
AC, that was like the most unconvincing shout out and beer of the week I think we've ever seen here from you. You know, it reminded me of it reminded me of Anchorman, where Brick is just naming things in the room that he loves. Lamp. I think you were just looking at your screen to see what the first thing was that popped up.
So I didn't do it with enough conviction, I guess. Grunion Pale Ale. Joseph Grow.
Let me see. Who can I grab off my Twitter feed? Jeff Fisher.
You know what? Whatever.
We love you, AC.
He's gonna shout out Lamp next.
I love Lamp.
Yeah. My shout out goes to Christian Gray. He's a follower of mine on Twitter. He and I tweeted back and forth a couple things this week. He's always got some good thoughts, good opinions. You can follow him. He's at Call Me Flash, underscores between call and me, underscore between me and Flash, at Call Me Flash.
All right. My shout out this week goes to, and if I'm butchering your name, Justin, I really do apologize. It's Justin Shocklighter. He's also known as Shockwurst on Twitter. He's been shouted out here before on the program, but you can follow him at SHAKWURST on Twitter. The dude is hilarious. I love his snarky commentary on Twitter, particularly when it comes to former Bengals beat writer Joe Reedy. So funny. Justin was kind enough to send a donation to SPNT today, and in the comments he said, F Joe Reedy, basically. So very funny. Thank you, Justin, for the love and we appreciate the support. If you want shouted out here on the podcast, just hit me up inside the jungle at spnt.tv. You can follow me on Twitter as well. I am at Nick Zuberlin. You can follow Anthony at CJ Anthony CUI. I got it right. It took me a minute. And you can follow Scott at Scott Van Tel. Before we get to the best segment of the week, let's go back to the Jungle Line. Area code 513. Hi, who's this?
Hey, this is James from Cincinnati.
Hey, James, what's up, man?
Hey, I'm sorry, I couldn't get you that Brandon Tate autograph. He didn't want anything to do with you, man.
Oh, sorry, man.
Yeah, well, I think it's funny, you know, I was really close to the field, and it always strikes me as insane when you're like down field level, it's really hard to tell what's actually going on in the game. Have you ever noticed that?
Say that again. I got distracted by Scott Bantel in the chat room. I don't know what's happening here with the podcast. So say that again. I'm sorry.
Yeah, sure. Like our seats were in the second row along one of the sidelines.
Okay.
I've noticed that I never really get a solid sense of what's happening in the game when I'm that low. I don't know if you've noticed that as well.
I have never had the luxury of sitting that close to a game before, but
you should try the preseason, man.
Yeah, I've been to some college games where I sat that low, and you're right, it's definitely a different perspective. And I've also sat, you know, in the top sections there at Paul Brown Stadium, and I think you get a great view. The higher up you get, I think you get a really good view of the game, and you see a lot of things you might not notice on television. However, you don't hear the hits, you don't hear the play calls, you don't hear the quarterback yelling, that sort of thing. So there are some pros and cons, but you're right. When you do sit that low, you do miss some of that action.
It's funny. I thought Ryan Nassib was tearing us up. I don't know why. I thought he was doing really well against us, and then I watched later on TV, and I see that he had a terrible stat line.
Yeah.
It's weird.
It's deceiving, isn't it?
Yeah. So I got a hypothetical question for y'all. This is kind of a long-form question, so bear with me.
Okay.
All right, it's late at night. You're walking home after spending some time at a bar. You got a street kebab in your hand. It came with a side of tater tots. You're walking down the street, and you run into an old man who says he's going to give you 1 star that you can put on any player on the team. That player is not going to get hurt. He's not going to get tired. He's not going to wear down from plays, and he's not going to have any Odell Thurman specials off the field. Which player do you pick for the season? Now, the caveat is the coaches don't know. So if you say Jeremy Hill, the coaches aren't just going to run him every down because they know he won't get tired.
Oh.
I know who I'd pick.
Andy Dalton.
That's who I'd pick. Yeah.
I mean, everyone's going to say I'm crazy, but you got to look at what I mean, Jeremy Hill, you still have Bernard and Burkhead. With Dalton, I mean, we're dropping to a guy that's never thrown an NFL pass, so I'd have to go Dalton.
That's where I'd go. Yep.
I'm going Geno Atkins. I don't want him getting hurt again. And what we saw a year ago what a less than stellar Geno Atkins was and what it meant to that defense. So I'm going to put my star on Geno.
I think I would say perfect.
Yeah.
Just because I don't want whatever's happening with his knee to be like a reoccurring thing. But I think it's interesting with the Bengals. There isn't really one clear answer. Of most other teams, the Packers are going to say Aaron Rodgers, the Patriots are going to say Brady, the Steelers are going to say Roethlisberger. The Seahawks probably are going to say Earl Thomas. I think with the Bengals, it's actually kind of a tough decision.
Yeah, and you could go a lot of different ways. I'd also argue you could probably put that star on Andrew Whitworth. I don't want him getting injured this year. So, yeah, I think it's an interesting question. And, yeah, I mean, I can't argue about Andy Dalton as well. I mean, that would be, as much as I hate to pin it all on him, the season really does make or break with the way he plays. So if he continues to do what he's doing, averages 10 wins a year, the Bengals are going to be in pretty good shape.
Well, I hope they average a little bit more than 10 wins a year, but.
Oh, I hope yeah, exactly.
I feel like I'm going to be happy this year if they get over the hump and they win a few playoff games, but I'm not going to be as upset if everything blows up this year, because then we're going to see something new. Obviously I don't want them to fail, but if they fail, I don't want them to have 9 wins or 8 wins. I want them to have 3 wins or 4 wins and see what we can do starting over.
Well, I mean, I've seen enough Bengals teams go 2-14 and 3-13 that I don't want that to happen at all. So I'd much rather have an 8-win year than a 3-win year personally. I want to be entertained on Sunday. I don't want to be watching crappy football. So
I almost just don't want a wild card loss. Like that's just what I don't want over anything else.
Well, fair enough. You can't win a playoff game if you don't get there. So. Would I rather them have a home field advantage in a first round bye? Abso-freaking-lutely. But you know what? I say go earn it and go win that first playoff game in Wild Card Weekend. And let's go. Of course, you got to worry about Oakland first. Let's not get too far ahead of ourselves.
Yep.
Well, awesome.
All right, I'll let you guys go.
Hey, appreciate the call, James.
Sure.
Hooday. That's James here on the Jungle Line giving us a ring. With that said, it's now time for. Oh, wrong one. Let's try this again, shall we? It would help if I knew what I was doing. It's time now for the Brandon Tate countdown to kickoff. 5 years in, and I still can't hit the right buttons. Our good pal, we've heard him the last couple of weeks here on the podcast, Brendan Warner. He's been down at training camp the last couple of weeks. And to celebrate 5 years of Inside the Jungle, well, just take a listen.
What's up, man? Hey, Brandon. I write for a website. We got a podcast. Okay. Our host is podcast? It's called Inside the Jungle. Okay. Our host is a big fan of yours, so could you read that little soundbite off? He would love it.
Hey, this is Brandon Tate. Shout out to Nick at the Inside the Jungle. Who they?
Nice. Thank you, man. He's gonna love that.
Oh, fantastic. Oh, man. That's awesome. Thank you, Brendan, for doing that. How cool is that?
I am speechless. Oh, my word.
That is awesome.
Oh, my word. That poor guy. That poor guy, dude. Oh, my word.
When he said, could you read this? I was like, oh, my gosh. He's going to read something about tater tots.
Oh, man. If he would have got a signed bag of tots for you, Nick, that would have been great.
Oh, so good. Now,
are you still rooting against the guy now?
I'm not rooting against. I think he's gonna. I've been telling you for weeks, for months. I think he's gonna make the team. I genuinely believe that.
I know, but you're not hoping he makes the team. You're thinking he's going to make it based on coaching decisions, but you're not hoping he is based on past history and what you've said about him, right?
Well, I'm hoping so I don't have to sit here shirtless and eating a bunch of tater tots. I look, when they signed him to a contract back in the spring, I knew the writing then was on the wall. And Dan Hoard just said it here in the interview. Darren Simmons trusts him, right? Marvin Lewis trusts him. That's why I think he's a lock to make the roster. So anyway, that was pretty cool. And thanks to Brandon Tate for doing that and reading that off. And thanks to Brendan for getting that. That was pretty epic. And again, I hit the wrong button. That was the Brandon Tate countdown. I just fan-held it again. Unbelievable. All right. Final thoughts as we wrap up the 5th anniversary show, episode 208, Scott Bantel.
Yeah, Nick, I wish I would have realized this was an anniversary show here. I would have maybe came with some gifts or flowers or something. I feel completely unprepared for this.
Well, yeah, I was thinking, too, that I might do it next week, and then I realized we weren't going to be... Yeah, and I knew we were going to have Dan Hoard on tonight, so it was very last minute getting Dan on, and we can't thank him enough for joining us. But yeah, I'm sorry I didn't let you guys know ahead of time.
Yeah, I mean, I would have dressed for you and everything.
Sorry.
That's right. As far as things I got to wrap up the show, just kind of excited to see how the first team builds off of week one. Like I said, they looked, offense and defense looked impressive. I'm not sure the Bucs are going to provide us a great measuring stick, but if they can do it 2 weeks in a row, that makes you feel a bit better about it. So pretty excited to see that, and like I said, I'd like to see A.J. McCarron and start seeing what he's got to offer.
I'm looking forward to that as well. I think getting A.J. out there is going to be good for the team. It's going to be good for A.J. for sure. So yeah, good stuff as always, Scott. AC, final thoughts?
I'm going to try and say this with more emotion since I was so lethargic with the shout-outs, according to Scott. One guy that we didn't really talk about that shined in the preseason game, and props to Kevin, I believe it's Kevin Gotti or Kev Gotti in the chat room, and I don't recognize that name, so maybe that's a first-timer in there. But Troy Hill, and that was another NFLPA Bowl guy that Cody and I really liked, and he played really well for a long period of time in that preseason opener there. So that's one guy. And an additional shout-out, that's why I asked you about him, Nick, Stephen Reed. He actually sent me a funny tweet a while back and didn't really get a chance to respond, and he's always been a good listener and a funny caller when he does decide to call in. Other than that, I hope that was as emotionally charged as Scott Bantel would really like it to be.
It was. Good job, AC. Thanks for the emotion.
Thank you.
On a serious note,
on
a serious note, before we get out of here, I'm going to. By the way, I'll give my thank yous here in a minute. I just forgot that I needed to also update our newest Patreon contributor, Brad Barnes. He was kind enough this week to support the show. He did send in this email as well. He says, I'm a newbie to the podcast. I discovered it only after this year's draft, and then I stumbled upon it by accident as I was looking for Bengals items on a Wednesday night while you were doing a live broadcast. I listened to the podcast and was hooked. I now listen every week, and I've downloaded the app. I have gone back and listened to old broadcasts, the very first one, the second week of January 2011 after Marvin Lewis was retained as the Bengals head coach, and I listened to some of your draft broadcasts this year. It's always entertaining. I think y'all, he says y'all, do a great job. So, Brad, thank you for the email. Thank you for your support of Inside the Jungle as well. This show is a listener-supported show, and we're just over halfway to our goal, our next goal level there on Patreon. I'd like to expand Inside the Jungle to make it a 3 or 4 show a week kind of deal during the season, but we need that support from Patreon if we want to make that happen. Honestly, if everybody who listens to the show just contributed $1 a month, which really isn't all that much, that's basically a quarter a week, guys and girls. That would really go a long way in helping us achieve our goals here with this podcast. So again, if you want to support the show, spnt.tv/Patreon is the address. That helps fund our video podcast. So for those of you who subscribe to the video feed, That's all made possible because of Patreon. So thank you for your support. The Inside the Jungle app, also all because of Patreon. So thank you for your support. Thank you for downloading the show like you do each and every week. Thanks for the emails, the calls. This show is a blast. It really is a lot of fun to do this each and every week. I really wish that Mickey was here tonight to celebrate 5 years because he's been a big part of it. I got to give a big shout out to my good friend Andy Barch. Without him, this show wouldn't have been possible. He was the original host of Inside the Jungle back when we started in August 2010. I filled in after that season when he couldn't do the show anymore, and I'm glad to see the show take off the way it did. It's pretty cool. The 5 years, I didn't think that this show would last 5 years, and it's amazing to see how far it's grown and how far it's gone, and it's only going to get better as we continue forward here. Obviously jumping on board with Cincy Jungle was huge for the show. It just grew immensely once we hopped on board with SB Nation, and once AC joined the cast and then Scott joined the cast. I mean, it's just a lot of fun every night, every Wednesday night, just hanging out talking Bengals. Where else are you going to get that, right? I mean, we've got fans from China, we've had fans from England call in. It's remarkable the reach that the Bengals have, and it's all because of this podcast, and we get to hear from you. So that's my long-winded way of saying thank you for supporting the show. Thank you for downloading the show, and really looking forward to what 2015 has in store for the podcast and for the Bengals. Just a reminder, Inside the Jungle is live. We record the show live every Wednesday night at 9 o'clock Eastern right here at cincyjungle.com. But, of course, if you can't make the show and you can't make the live broadcast, don't worry. You can always catch our audio on demand via the Inside the Jungle app, which you can download at spnt.tv/apps. It's available for both the Android and iOS platforms. And, of course, if you subscribe to other podcasts, you can always find us on iTunes. We're on Stitcher. We're on TuneIn. Anywhere you can find podcasts, you can find Inside the Jungle. And, as always, I had to give a special shout-out and thanks to our associate producers. These are the guys that contribute a lot of money on Patreon every month, and I cannot thank them enough for their support. Andy Lanham, Larry Rolston, Mike Vardy, Chris Setters is back on board as an associate producer, Fado Bayari, and our newest associate producer, the one and only Josh Schuster. Thank you, gentlemen, for your support of the show, and looking forward to working with you this fall, as always. All right, enough rambling from me. Big thanks to Dan Horde from the Bengals Radio Network for joining us this week on episode 208. Just a reminder, Inside the Jungle is an SPNT production. For more information about our other podcasts, make sure you log on to spnt.tv. And do me a favor, go out and check out cincyjungle.com. AC writes a ton and does a great job. Scott writes and does a great job. Mickey is another one of those guys who does some good writing as well. Rebecca's been crushing it at the site. Jason, Brennan, I mean, I can name a bunch of people that are just crushing it at cincyjungle.com. Go read the stuff, support the site, and go Bengals. So until next Wednesday, for Mickey, AC, Scott, I'm Subs. We'll see you next time on Inside the Jungle. Hoo day, everybody!